We're live.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here today. We're going to start with our call to order and roll call. So, Ms. Kadetsky, when you're ready, will you please call the roll?
Good morning. Ms. Josie Bonhart?
Here.
Ms. Pat Bradford?
I am here.
Ms. Stephanie Craybill?
And with that, we're going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Moving on to the approval of the agenda, do I hear a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
I'll second. Any discussion? Hearing no discussion, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We have approved the agenda. Moving next on the agenda is approval of the minutes. I make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Second?
Any discussion with that? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That passes. That's going to bring us to the first policies up for review. Ms. Bradford, you had asked to put these on the agenda. These are the policies coming out of ad hoc recommendation for us to discuss potentially with agenda review. So with that, I will turn it over to you.
Yes. And I'm going to need a little help from Mr. Vogel. But if you look in your, on your packet, page 1 of 3, under Policy Code 2300, coming out of ad hoc, there's just a couple of things that we need to tweak. And I will make a note, Mr. Vogel, on that, the definition of official meeting, I'd like some clarity on that later on, because it talks about what makes up a quorum, and I'm still not absolutely certain. You know, open meeting laws, when there's 3 of us, there's 4 of us, there's 5 of us. At some point, I'd love to hear something from you on that. But under a B1, regular meetings, if we take that language and we just add a new paragraph underneath that that says agenda review meetings will be held on the last Tuesday of the month unless impacted by a holiday. The superintendent shall keep on file a schedule of the agenda review meetings. So basically, you just adopt that paragraph, changing regular meetings to agenda review and changing the date from the first to the last. So that's one there to get us going. And then the last sentence in there, generally all routine or non-urgent matters will be acted upon. That needs to go to the agenda briefing. So we would strike that in that paragraph and move it into a new paragraph 2, so that all routine non-urgent matters will be acted upon at the agenda review meeting.
Mr. Vogel, if you could give feedback on that. Thanks.
You're welcome, Madam Chair. Ms. Bradford, are you suggesting that the agenda review meeting would be a type of regular meeting as opposed to a specially called meeting?
Well, on that page B is types of meeting, and then you have regular meetings, and then you have emergency meetings. So I was going to suggest we slide it in between the two. It's a regular meeting, then an agenda review meeting, then emergency meeting, then specially called. But it can go under specially called if there's a legal reason why it should. You had mentioned that once before, but when I read this to review for this, I didn't see the reason for sticking it into special unless there's a legal reason.
Yeah, I'd have to go back to see statutorily whether meetings are only supposed to be classified as regular, emergency, or specially called. I would suggest that it be considered a specially called meeting.
Okay.
Being a subset of 3.
Okay. So then I'm going to make a motion in a minute to do that. And then if you flip over to policy 2310,
Ms. Bradford, before we jump to that policy, Mr. Vogel, would you please address what she was discussing for 2300A, definition of an official meeting, before we move on from that?
My question, Mr. Vogel, is it says, a majority of the members of the public body for the purpose of, 1, conducting hearings, and I'm putting in my numbers, 2, participating in deliberations, or 3, voting upon or otherwise transacting the public business of the public body. So that constitutes when open meetings law kick in, but can you give us more clarity on that?
I think you're asking about how that applies in the board committee context.
I'm asking how it applies, in board committee context, but also in when there are 4 of us or 5 of us listening to a presentation.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, the open meetings law kicks in when the board is conducting business, which includes deliberating. Does not necessarily include sitting in on a presentation and just listening. I'm not talking about presentations at a board meeting. I'm talking about some kind of third-party presentation. That's not necessarily conducting business unless board members are around the table and there's like a give and take. But if it's just a matter of sitting in the audience and listening, that's not necessarily conducting business, an event that triggers the open meetings law.
And for committees?
And the same would go for committees.
Are you okay with that then? Can we move on?
I think I would like to see, so you're saying to add the agenda review language under specially called meetings.
Yep.
So we'd be able to specifically name. I think I'd like to see that written as we move forward. I guess the question becomes, specially called meetings and adding the agenda review, if we end up skipping it 1 month, is that going to be an issue? Things like that, like procedurally, if we add this into.
No,
Okay.
that wouldn't be an issue. There are, certain things that flow from conducting monthly, like the call to audience. That's a statutory requirement. But specially called meetings are those that, can be called, but don't have to be called.
Does it have something to do with the noticing? I'm remembering another conversation, why it might be specialty. Does it have something to do with noticing? And Ms. Barnhart, if you take that first paragraph, regular meetings will be held on the first Tuesday. If you change that to agenda review meetings will be held on the last Tuesday, everything else stays the same. And then I want to strike that last sentence in 1 because it belongs in this new category with all routine, non-urgent matters will be acted upon at the agenda review meeting.
Dr. Faust, did you have anything to add?
I was wanting to make sure I was just understanding. So we're wanting to make our agenda review a full-on, meeting. So past times, I don't even know if we actually even had an agenda review meeting. So I'm wanting to make sure that I understand the concept of what we're wanting to do so that I can be prepared. So we're wanting an agenda review meeting to be a specialty called meeting and then follow under there versus what is it that we do now? What would it? Is there anything different than what we do now?
It really is a specially called meeting now.
Mm-hmm. And so when we're there, so before it would be the chair, the superintendent, the chair, vice chair, and sometimes you'd swap others out. And that was an agenda review. It was just review the agenda. Is because we're wanting to. I just want to get a conceptualization. That's all.
We're wanting to. Sorry. Everything we've talked about in the ad hoc committee meetings for the changes that we're bringing to you at the meeting next week. So these two things would be on the same, are going to be kind of simultaneously. go down through the way. But one of the major proposals, recommendations, is to take all non-essential information and move it to the agenda review. That's why that last line would be struck. But everything else would just set out what the agenda review was. So if you take that regular meeting, first paragraph, change regular meeting to agenda review meeting, it'd be identical to that, except last Tuesday instead of first Tuesday. That's why I didn't type it out, because it was already written.
So, sorry, my question would be, so if we put that under there, and let's say that we can't get a quorum for the agenda review,
Same as if we can't get a quorum for a regular meeting, isn't it?
then we wouldn't get to have the meeting, but an agenda review is just to go over the agenda.
Well, but at that point now, we're having informational, we're doing a lot more in the agenda review than we are currently doing now. The goal was, the recommendation is to save the regular meeting for the business of the board, voting on things, and covering all the questions and answers, all the discussion, and all the informational part from staff in the agenda review.
Mr. Vogel, I think the question that Dr. Faust has is if, in the event that agenda review does not meet a quorum, are we still able to operate an agenda review at the end of the month? Is that what you're getting at? Okay.
Yeah, no, the point is well taken. If you don't have a quorum, you cannot conduct business. You would not be able to hold the agenda review specially called meeting. You could still set an agenda. We have a board policy on setting the agenda that the chair and the superintendent set an agenda. But as far as holding a meeting of the kind that Ms. Bradford is, discussing, you wouldn't be able to without a quorum. That's right.
That's a really good point. So maybe we back right on out of here. Do we need a reference in policy for the agenda review as we're trying to take it? Or am I just trying to cover my bets here?
I think what you're trying to do is you're trying to formalize what the board has been doing to a great extent anyway, and that is, not merely having the chair and the superintendent set an agenda for a regular board meeting, but have a full agenda review meeting. The board has essentially been holding specially called meetings, calling it agenda review. And I think what you're attempting to do is formalize it and put some rules around it about what its purpose is, and you're entitled to do that.
Ms. Bradford, in light of the discussion that's happened, I believe that we should make no changes. I make a motion to make no changes to this policy. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay.
Wait, I didn't make it.
Make no changes to this policy 2300.
I would like to leave it on the agenda for next meeting, because there's that one little thing about,
So then I make a motion to hold this policy in committee.
yes, ma'am. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That's going to be held in committee 2300. So that puts us to 2310, public participation at board meetings.
Under B, on page 21, one of two, each month, the first part, I just want to bring this to the board's attention. And each month, the first part of at least one regular scheduled meeting will be set aside for the citizens to address. The call to the audience is supposed to be in the first part, because one of the recommendations we have for the ad hoc is to move the call to audience to the end. And I know that has a chance of not passing, but it is the will of the committee to bring that forward. So I just wanted to bring that to attention. It is set out now in policy that will be at the first part. There's
So
some
I make
other
a
language
motion
in
to-
there that bears everyone reading, because we're kind of wonky in the way we do things.
So looking at what you're suggesting is instead of the first part, so each month of at least one regular board meeting, so striking the words, the first part, so still including the call to audience, but allowing the flexibility for the board to decide where it falls. Is that what I hear the consensus being?
I could move that, if we're ready to go on with that.
Is there any other changes that you're suggesting for this policy?
Having trouble reading my writing right now. If you look at the very last sentence on that page, If an unusual large number of people request to speak, a majority of the board may decide to request the designation of a spokesman for each group of persons supporting the opposing or the same positions. I don't know that we're doing that. I just want to bring it to the board's attention when we do look at this as a full board, because we're not currently making use of that, and it might be an option. And that's it for that one for me.
I would make a motion to adopt this policy, striking the words, the first part from B, first paragraph, and bring it forward with those changes to the board meeting. Do I hear a second?
Yes, but let me amend the first part. Each month, at least, so the first part of, take the of to,
Okay.
strike that, first part of.
The
So I
first part
second that,
of.
as amended.
So then we'll vote on the amendment. All in favor?
Aye?
Aye. Any opposed? And we'll vote on the motion, which will be to strike the first part of from public participation at board meetings. So all in favor?
Aye?
Aye. Any opposed? That passes 2-1. So 2310, we'll move on to policy. And Mr. Vogel, if you could make those changes and get those to Ms. Kadetsky for the board meeting.
Okay. 2330, this is the agenda format. Dr. Faust had mentioned in our last agenda review that this had been adopted. It was adopted in July 2021, was amended in September 2021. It was changed October a year ago. Actually, it was adopted in 2020. But this says it's a template, and template means you have to follow it. So we could either just pull this, or a simpler way would be under agenda format. The following agenda format is to be used as a suggested guideline. Take out as, strike as a template, and insert as suggested, as a suggested guideline. And that would take care of that. And then one other thing, in studying the agenda format and looking at Robert's Rules of Order, there is one item here that Roberts does not have on its suggestions of agenda suggestions, and that would be the third from the bottom, correspondence. I don't know how that got in there, but it's not a part of what Roberts, so I would suggest we strike that. So those are the two things on that one. And I move that we, policy 2330, under A, we strike the language as a template, change it, inserting as a suggested guidance, and strike correspondence in that list. And then it's just there if somebody needs to see it, but it's not a template. So that was a motion.
I will second that, and I do have a small add with discussion. I'd like to, when it comes to section B, placing items on the agenda, I would like to expand to 4 board meetings when we have a request. I think that part of the problem is we're trying to cram in lots of information into our board meetings, and so having the flexibility of a third of the year to make sure that we get the discussions, I think that would be something that we should be consider. And I don't know if our staff want to weigh in on that as far as time-wise when we get requests from both the public and our board members. But having a little bit more time, I feel like would help consolidate our board meetings to a shorter time.
So you're saying 4 lines down, strike 2, change it to 4, insert 4?
Yes.
I'm great with that amendment.
So then to recap, there's a first and second on the table to change in Part A, the agenda format, striking as a template and replacing it with the words as a suggested guidance, and also striking 2 board meetings and insert the word 4.
Madam Chair, you missed one. Third from the bottom on the list, striking correspondence, replacing it with nothing.
So let me try this again. And Ms. Bradford, I think that you would, because of the motion on the table, I think you would need to amend it to add the 2 to 4 board meeting motion. So if you'd like to make it that amendment
Madam
at this
Chair, I
time.
do amend 3 changes to policy 2330 under A, agenda format, strike as a template, insert as a suggested guidance in the list. Third from the bottom, strike correspondence. And under B, 4 lines down, strike 2, insert the number 4. So within the next 4 board meetings.
And I would second that amendment. All in favor of those amendments?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Nope. And then that goes, well, I think that, do we vote on the original motion? I think we do.
We have one more. This is policy 2335, advanced delivery of meeting materials.
Before you keep going, Ms. Bradford, on 2330, with that amendment passing, that's going to go, I'm just housekeeping here, 2330 is going to go to the board with those changes to be made by Mr. Vogel that we just voted on.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And now moving on to what you were saying.
Just something I want everyone to realize, this says, our policy says at least 5 days prior to regular or interim board meetings, the superintendent shall provide the following materials. So just want to bring to everybody's attention, it says 5 days. If we're not doing that, we might want to change that. We might need longer, we might need less, but it does say 5 days.
Thank you for that. I don't think, I'll make a motion to not take action on this policy at this time. Would you like to hold it in policy to next month, or are you just fine with?
Sure, let's hold it.
Okay, so I'll make a motion to move 2335 to be kept in policy for next month. Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That is going to be held in policy 2335. That brings us to the Code of Ethics that came back from the board. Really, there's a split decision on the board of whether or not this is necessary. Mr. Vogel, I want just to get from you, the language that you added is in compliance with the law. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
And Mr.
Within
Barnes,
the board's discretion.
Mr. Barnes, I have a question for you. As the HR director, do you have a file on me as an elected official? Whenever there's a complaint that comes in, a concern, is there a way that you personally document it?
The board polices its own, so I would turn that over to the superintendent.
And that is exactly my point. So my question becomes to my fellow board members is to sit here and discuss accountability. It is not about a gotcha moment. It is not about something that is out of lines. We have procedures and policies in place that when there is an issue arise, there's a protocol to back this up. That is the whole purpose of having this accountability paragraph here. So with that, I make a motion to bring this forward to the board as presented.
Madam Chair, may we have some discussion before we go any further?
I'd like to have a motion on the table before we continue discussion.
Second.
Okay, now discussion.
Page 29, that last paragraph about criminal charges and duties, that seems to really, really rile up some board members. And if I remember correctly, Mr. Vogel, it's in there just because it is. So what would be the harm in taking that last little paragraph on page 29 out? A board member's willful failure to discharge duties may result in criminal charges. I believe that that's part of the law anyway. So what would it hurt to take that one out?
Legally, there's no significance to taking it out. You can take it out.
So then my question back to my fellow board member would be, it is part of the law. I don't understand why putting it in there is so scary for board members, because whether it's written or not, if it's the will of the committee, I will move to strike it, but it should not be scary. This is part of the oath that we have adopted and want to abide by. And so I'm trying not to chuckle here, but a board member's willful failure to discharge of duties may result in criminal charges pursuant to a law. There is a law. So whether it scares us or not, it's the law.
Point well taken. I withdraw my concerns.
Okay, so we have a first and a second on the table. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That is going to pass and move forward with no changes, 2120, to the next board meeting. That brings us to 2315, opening invocation before a board meeting. I make a motion to adopt this policy as is.
Second.
Any discussion on this?
I just would remind everyone that we're talking about constitutional rights here. And when you give up a constitutional right, history says you almost never, ever, ever, ever get it back. So we need to be very careful as board members when we're trying to give up constitutional rights. And yeah, I'm just going to leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bradford. My goal when asking council to draft this policy was to ensure that we were in legal compliance about how invocations are run, how it is operated. And so, and Mr. Vogel, I'm asking you now, in your research, this is what the law says is legal and compliant and according to our Constitution. Is that correct?
That is correct.
I know the one feedback that I gave and I talked to with board members was the time length, because I did not want to see a 5 or 10 minute invocation. So we included a 3-minute that we thought was ample time for our guests to be given. So with that, the whole point of this policy is to be in legal compliance. And so it's not about who we like or dislike to give the invocation. It's providing an opportunity. And with that, I think that we should vote.
And I just would point out one more thing. Our founding fathers wrote our founding documents to protect us for just such a time as this. They knew that in the future things would be challenged. And it's been a great learning experience to go back and read the First Amendment, to read the court cases on this, and to become better aware of what our rights are, and learning that the common myth about separation of church and states is just that. It's a common myth. It's not in the documents anywhere. And so I appreciate the opportunity and the pushback on this so that we could learn more and become more informed citizens.
Is there any other discussion with this?
No.
Okay, there's a motion on the table to move this forward to policy. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? So that is 2315 is going to be moving forward with no changes to the board meeting. That brings us to 3460, and Dr. Barnes, I'm going to take the mic to you.
Yes, the only change we'd like to add to this policy, if you go to page 46, adding a little sentence there that talks about the student acknowledging that if they're going to be an early graduate, they are still considered a student until they receive their diploma.
I make a motion to adopt this policy.
Second?
Any discussion?
No.
Okay. All in favor to move this forward to the regular board meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That's going to move forward 3460 to the regular board meeting with the changes that are presented. Dr. Barnes, now we're at 4040 and 7310.
Okay. 4040 and 7310 encompasses staff, student, and relations. On page 49, we wanted to add a sentence there in the second last paragraph of section A, that a student enrolled in the school system, if the local school board has assigned them to a school and they have not yet received their diploma. So that would cover anybody who's an early graduate. They are still considered a student until they receive their diploma. So that is one part in there. And if you look on page 50 at the bottom, we had talked about adding in language speaking to employees having students in their personal vehicles. However, on reflection, if you look up at the highlighted section in the second paragraph on page 49, the policy states that interactions and relationships between staff and students must be based on cooperation, respect, and understanding of appropriate boundaries. It's my estimation as the HR director that that would include having someone in your vehicle. Now, of course, we're not speaking to an emergency situation. However, in this case, I think this existing language would cover the expectation of not having students in your personal vehicle.
So you're saying that number 3, personal private vehicles, you don't want to include it, we should strike that?
I think that you can strike that because in my interpretation of policy, it is covered in that second paragraph at the top.
I would agree with your consensus, Dr. Barnes, and the one thing that I feel that would be an extenuating circumstances specifically is when it comes to sports. And so there have been times, because when I was in the school system, I coached that you're left in the parking lot with a student waiting on a parent. And so I know in discussion and preparation for this, I asked you about that question. There are going to be some extenuating circumstances, and one of the things that Dr. Barnes had said was potentially the opportunity of calling an Uber for a child, or if it's 2 a.m. and the parent's not being reached, is to have the supervisor on the phone while you're driving that child home to ensure the safety of the child, but then also to give that validity of making sure that we're not crossing any boundaries.
And the policy does state that employees should consult their supervisor anytime they're not sure what would be appropriate or not, and then our principals and directors can guide that when they need to.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Burns, on page 51, just below that, this is very small print for my eyes, but I see D has red on it, and it said comments about insert language. What, are we doing anything with that?
No, I only think that D, I think that might be an error that D is highlighted.
Okay.
So with that, I would make a motion to adopt this policy, but striking the C language, which is personal private vehicles.
Oh, second?
Hearing a first and a second, any other discussion?
No.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so that's going to be moving forward, and Mr. Vogel, if you could make those changes and edits for that policy for the board meeting. That will bring us to a new first policy, which is 6081, fraternization. Dr. Barnes.
Yes, we already have in existence a policy 7100 that speaks to hiring and to nepotism and those sorts of things. What we don't have is a policy that speaks to relationships that may develop after two employees are already working together. Now, this does not in any way require people, it does not stop people from developing friendships, relationships in this sort of way, but they do have to inform HR, and then HR would work with them to ensure that that doesn't impact on the working environment. So this is a policy that sort of didn't follow through with the new policy revisions from the state board, but we think it's a hole that we can fill with something that speaks to this need to sort of be above board and inform people it's not a disciplinary action, but we would work with them to ensure that they don't, their duties don't overlap, it doesn't impact on the working environment. We have this happen, a couple of times a year that we would like to be able to have a little more policy to guide us with.
I have a question for Dr. Barnes.
Yes.
I don't understand. This says at the bottom of it on page 55, 2 of 2, adopted 2/15/14. So do we have this adopted in policy or we don't?
And I'll speak to that clarification. Part of the draft into this came from the old policy manual, and it did not get updated into the new policy manual. So back in February of 2014, we did have this policy in place, but currently we do not have this policy in place. So that's why it would be a policy for first reading, but it's coming from our old book of policy. So thank you for that correction, Ms. Bradford.
Sort of a resurrection.
So I guess when we present this at the board meeting, Mr. Vogel, we would need to change the adopted at the very end, and you could help with that formatting.
You could just put resurrected in the date.
So with that, I make a motion to move this forward with the changes in the adopted language to the board.
Second.
Any other discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That's going to be a policy for first reading, 6081. 6510.
This one isn't necessarily a change per se, but when you and I spoke, Ms. Bradford, we talked about maybe discussing and ensuring that it was understanding about this use of equipment, materials, and supplies in letter D. That does include using school vehicles for your personal use. It does involve using school materials for your personal use. So we don't necessarily need to have an updated policy to speak to this. You and I talked about maybe referencing this today, and then we can make sure that that clearly is stated to principals and to staff, that that includes the use of school vehicles for personal use and that sort of thing.
This is the one that talks about, don't take home the copy paper and the toilet paper.
Yes, ma'am. Toilet paper isn't spelled out in there, but yeah, that's sort of what it gets at. Using the copier, using the school vehicle for your personal use is sort of the main things that we see with that.
And this is current policy that was adopted February 1, 2022?
Yes, we talked about maybe just referencing it and being clear that it doesn't really need to change in our policies per se.
And hearing the discussion, would we like to add language specifically to add personal vehicles? That's what I feel like I'm hearing a committee member say.
Spelled out, it makes it that much harder to deal with when it happens. So, yeah, sure.
Mr. Vogel, would you be able to add the language to include, but not limited to, such as personal vehicles, to something of that extent to this policy?
Yes, was there a specific place?
Dr. Barnes, I'm thinking you had said D, the equipment, materials, and supplies are intended to further the board's goals. So somewhere in there to specifically say personal vehicles?
Well, I think they can use their personal vehicles. That's what they're for. I'm thinking they can't use school vehicles for personal use.
Yeah.
Thank you for that correction.
So you would either add an E or just tack it on to D.
I
And
think
maybe
you
put
could just add
vehicle,
the
use of
sentence-
equipments, vehicles, materials, and supplies. Use of
think you just
vehicles,
add-
equipment.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I think you just add a sentence there at the very end of that paragraph that says this will include use of school vehicles for personal use, something along those
Yeah,
lines.
and then in the heading, you can just put vehicles in front of equipment, just make it real clear.
I don't think necessarily the heading needs to be vehicles.
Okay.
But I would make a motion to add that sentence. Dr. Barnes, would you say it again? This will include vehicles to be used as, okay. This will include vehicles to be used. As
Second.
school vehicles to be used as personal use.
I will second that.
Okay. All in favor to move this forward with those changes?
Aye.
Any opposed? And so, Mr. Vogel, you'll be adding that language as well to 6510 for the board meeting. And
Will do.
then, yes, sir? Oh, thank you. And then policy 7205, Dr. Barnes, this is a policy for first reading as well.
Yes, this was brought to us by Mr. Vogel. Typically, what it is sort of a place where all of our other policies are re-specified in clear language for what is appropriate. A lot of what you see in standards of professional conduct is also contained in some of our other policies, such as 7300, our professionalism clause, all those things are, but this sort of puts it all in one place to be very specific as to what the requirements are. My folks, or the folks in HR, we really feel like this won't impact on our day-to-day work significantly. It just may help our employees have a place where they can go what's appropriate and what's not. Now, in some regards, we expect their own professional judgment in those areas, but this may help guide some folks a little more directly. I do want to point your attention to number Z. That's a letter, by the way. Letter Z, I think, is the only place that might bear a little bit of conversation. It speaks a little bit, and my only concern is it sort of has the potential to overlap into delivery of instruction and curriculum. So I think that may bear a little more review. However, I think the devil's in the details in a lot of these things, that this would really be how it was interacted and interpreted, I think would be the question.
Thank you, Dr. Barnes. And reading through it, I think section Z is discussing to ensure well-rounded conversation is being had in the classroom. So I hear what you're saying, and there's definitely some overlap. But I think with that lens of understanding that the purpose of this section is to ensure well-rounded instruction, I think most most of the individuals in our profession would understand that. Ms. Bradford, did you have any questions with this?
I move that we just adopt this one as is.
I'll second that. Any other further discussion? All in favor?
Madam Chair, can I just make a clarifying comment?
Yes.
Thanks. I think Dr. Barnes stated that I brought this to Dr. Barnes or suggested maybe that I had recommended it, but I had just had a conversation with Dr. Barnes maybe a couple of months ago about whether or why this policy was not part of our policy manual, and understood that there was a policy 7300. I just want to make clear that this was not a recommendation of mine, that the board have policy 7205. Happy to have it, but this wasn't something that was a recommendation from the board attorney.
So with the first and second on table, 7200 to be moved forward to policy for first reading. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And that passes. Moving to 7240, a drug-free and alcohol-free workplace.
This policy more is just a language adoption to sort of keep up with the times, so to speak. We really wanted to just clear up that illegal activities rather than just trying to specify and make it a little broader so it's a little cleaner to read. I'm looking at page 66 on the bottom.
So
Yes, ma'am. It makes the scope just a little broader.
And I make a motion to move this policy forward as written.
second?
Any other discussion? So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That's going to be moved forward, 7240 to the board meeting with no changes. Bringing 7300 to the table.
7300, there's two areas that we wanted to look at. One is a question about profane language has come up, and where is that embedded into our policy? And this is another place where I don't think a change is required, just more of an explanation. That for my interpretation of our policy 7300, profane language lands under letter D of demonstrating respect, commitment to the truth through attitude, behaviors, and communication. So if the question about profane language came up, my answer to that is this is embedded in our policy already.
Thank you, sir. So that's D, and then the change H is coming out of legislation.
Correct.
The Senate Bill 49. So supporting parents in effectively participating in their child's education and never encourage or coerce a child to withhold information from a parent. And I support that change, so I'm going to make a motion to move this forward.
I will second it. Can we have discussion?
Yes. So
Second,
okay.
discussion?
Second, and now
I'll just point
discussion.
out, Dr. Barnes, letter D, those are staff responsibilities for all the things that are in our code of ethics. The staff is held to that standard, and yet we have a problem with it. So just an observation.
There's a motion and a second on the table. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? So that will be brought forth before the board meeting, before the board in October, 7300. That goes to Workday. Mr. Barnes, it's you again. Dr. Barnes, excuse me.
Yes, ma'am. It's a Dr. Barnes show today. 7300, we want to add language if you look on page 74. Currently, there's no policy that guides if someone abandons their job, because the board, it's unable to terminate someone without a board hearing and appeal and all those opportunities to make sure our employees feel that, things are being done transparently and appropriately. However, if they leave and don't come back, what we would like to do is insert this language that after 7 days of non-contact, that we can assume that that employee has resigned rather than terminated. Sort of like in high school when the girl stopped answering the phone when I called, eventually it would be easier for me just to get the message.
So I did have a question, because I think we were discussing whether it was supposed to be 5 business days or 7, and could you speak to that?
We said 7 consecutive workdays. I think that that is what is currently in our personnel handbook.
Okay,
Correct.
to make it consistent with our personnel
Protect-
handbook,
go
okay.
team.
So with that, I will make a motion to move this policy forward before the board.
Second?
Any other discussion, Ms. Bradford, or anyone else? Okay, so there's a first and second on the table. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? So that's going to go before the board, 7,500 with the changes as presented. The next section is for the substantial policy amendments from NCSBA. The first bringing us to parental involvement, 1310/4002. Many of these changes, I absolutely agree with and concur, and I think that the district is in compliance with a lot of this. I did see in the draft budget that got released that the implementations, as far as the district being on the hook, if you will, they're recommending for January to be in line, and I don't know if this is what you all are seeing as well, but I saw that update, I think it came out at 9 o'clock or 2 a.m., something like that, last night. So I did want to bring to the attention of the committee and / our staff the timeline and how is this going to interact with our website. I see this very easily for us to have a separate tab to kind of include all of these things that we're needing to fulfill, as well as I think that we should consider having a district form. Some things are allowing notification, opting out, things like that. So rather than it be dependent on the school, I think the district should show initiative in that form just to provide consistency so that there's not frustration on, your end as administrator of saying, how am I going to do this in compliance and also be consistent with what the district expectations are. So I think for me, reading over it, I would like to hear kind of the rollout of what we're planning as the district for all these, because I think these things are important, but I think that the district level, there needs to be some support as far as forms and direction, whether that's a tab on the website or a separate entity, things like that. But that's kind of the bulk of my discussion with that. I'd love for others to jump in.
I can speak to the parent guide.
Thank you.
And we are already working on pulling all the information together. Right now, we are creating a tab, table of contents. We will then work with communication to compile that in a way that is friendly for parents and put it on the website. And we are also we'll be working with principals on how to add that component for the individual student. So we are working behind the scenes because, like you, we're feeling January is that date that we're going to have this, have to have this ready. So we're already working behind the scenes on that. And I will let Ms. Varnum speak to the survey.
Well, specifically, I want to, along with the additional information, the student health information, any screenings, surveys, that kind of thing, we have already transitioned our staff to opt in and with expressed written consent for any screenings. We historically have held a mass screening at the beginning of every school year for certain grades for vision and hearing. We paused on that, ensuring that we were in compliance with the Parents' Bill of Rights. In addition, my team is already working to compile the additional annual notifications to families, because while these things have been a right and an opportunity, there wasn't necessarily that notification. So we're adding in particular pieces to a draft revision of the student handbook and looking at changing that to really be the parent and student handbook for annual notifications and the code of conduct. And then additionally, we are eagerly awaiting information from DPI on student support guidance. That is a part of the implementation that DPI will submit to districts. Some updates regarding the roles of school counselors and school social workers to give some clarity from understanding the national models that we use, whether it's the ASCA national model for counselors and the code of ethics for those, and the code of ethics ethics for social workers. So we're working feverishly to be ready, but also waiting on more information from DPI. And I'm happy to answer any questions on my areas.
Thank you. Ms. Bradford?
I don't have any questions. I just will point out, after having watched the legislature for so darn long, it's like watching a close football game. The last couple of seconds, the ball can move back and forth, up and down the field, and so you need to be prepared for anything. And when the law was enacted, the law was enacted. Now they're talking, but we've seen that goal. I mean, the play go back and forth across the field again and again and again. So I appreciate y'all getting ready.
Yeah, and I think it's safe to say we're not in full compliance of this, but we are working in that direction of understanding where those are. And I think that's the biggest thing is as we roll out to be effective and consistent with the expectation is very important. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts, and I know that we had changed our survey policy a few months back, and we mirrored a lot of this language so that we didn't go through this twice in a row. I do want to acknowledge, because I did have some parents reach out to me about health screenings being on hold. So it's just on hold, right? It's still a possibility, so I'd love for you to speak to that.
Yes, they're still a possibility. And to clarify, in our preschool programs, some of the requirements for Head Start and other of our preschool programs include the requirement for screenings, but those are with parental consent. So I've already reviewed the acknowledgments that our preschool team is using, and those seem to be very compliant with the written parental consent. Additionally, if a student is referred for learning problems to their multi-tiered system of support team, or potentially even the IEP team, the Individualized Education Program team, they would automatically, with parental consent, go through a vision and hearing screening as well. So we aren't denying if we see signs or symptoms, moving through that process. It's just that in the past, that process has been able to be done by mass screening and not requiring opt-in consent. So we will be looking at how we roll out any mass screenings in the future, making sure that each parent has the opportunity to opt their child into it. But if there is any concern, our school nurses and our speech language pathologists are still ready to receive any parental consent and do screenings.
Thank you for that clarity. And I think part of it would be a very easy thing to put at the very beginning of the year and then just notify when it's coming up. So if I'm providing consent at the beginning of the year, I'd still get a notification of it happening, but my consent is already on file. And so I know since this got enacted right before the start of school, that was harder to do because we collect paperwork for months before the school starts. I do want to add, looking at page 82, it's page 5 of the document, letter F, the educational choices available to parents, and the advertising of that. And I don't know if the county already does this, because I know as far as who we're able to direct, it's just traditional public schools. So we have no control over charter and private schools. So allowing the option to be available, I don't want people to get the impression that we have control over these schools, but it's saying to notify. So I don't know if we could work with the county if they're notifying, and we can just include a link of saying, here's all the choice options in our area, but New Hanover County Schools is only, yeah.
So that's an excellent question. And in other language that I've seen around the Parents' Bill of Rights, it does say that DPI will be creating something for districts to be able to use. One thing for us is we're really trying to capture every student that we can to maintain our ADM and to keep our student count where it is. So we don't necessarily want to encourage or advertise for others, our competitors, because we believe we are the premier education opportunity in the county. So looking for more information from DPI on how they envision that being appropriate across the state.
Thank you. My last question, I just wanted to bring concern, just awareness and question this is, when we have groups and entities that are coming in and offering courses or things like that, since we now have specifically in regards to, I'm looking at page 11, number 14, number 5, instructions on gender identity, sexual activity, and sexuality, specifically in kindergarten through 4th grades. I want to ensure that the groups that we bring in to help assist in any format program are abiding by those rules, and so I don't know if that might mean we need to make changes to some of our MOUs, but I don't know what the crossover with who we work with to do that. I just wanted to bring that to attention in case it needed to be.
Yeah, and I can speak to that. We've already been in conversation. So aside from, I'm not in charge of the health and PE courses, but a lot of the supplemental information regarding health and safety attitudes and behaviors for our students, regarding pertinent needs, those will all be opt-in. So we've already planned that and worked with our partnering agencies for that. And we've already confirmed with our partnering agencies that already run services for us, like Forest Academy with the day treatment program, and like with our WAT clinics, our Wilmington Health Access for Teens clinics, that the only service provided is only after written consent from the parents, and that's been consistent already.
And I'll just say, we had the same thing with the physical education, and it has to first be aligned to the standards, and then it has to be opt-in, and parents are notified of the options, and students and parents both are understand that they do not have to be a part of this. It's truly a choice of the parent.
Thank you for that clarity. With that, I'm going to make a motion to hold this in policy to ensure that the mechanics that we're working through, they can each be addressed, and we'll have the staff the opportunity to share out those. With that, I make a motion to hold this in policy.
Until what happens?
I would like for it to stay in policy so that as the protocols and procedures are rolled out, they have the opportunity to share those versus we could make a motion to put it before the board and adopt it now, but there are changes that are still happening. So I feel like it would be better suited to give them the opportunity to share what changes we're making openly about it.
My only concern would be the law changed. There's a request to move the goalpost out, but in the meantime, the law changed and being in compliance. So maybe I have a question for the attorney. Is this a gray area? I know one school district has gone ahead and adopted these, as rolled out by the School Board Association, or maybe they did it even before that. So where do we fall in terms of legal compliance?
Well, several school boards have already enacted new policies to implement the Parents' Bill of Rights because it's been the law for a little over a month now. The news that Madam Chair referred to came out last night about the possibility of there being a provision in the budget bill that's making its way through the legislature this week to put off the effective date of some, I don't know about all, but at least some provisions of the Parents' Bill of Rights till January 1st. But that's just a discussion, and that's not been enacted. So as of today, the Parents' Bill of Rights is law, has been law for over a month, and school boards across the state are beginning to enact policies like this to implement the law.
Thank you.
Can I, Mr. Vogel, would you be able to provide us with a overview, bill summary, and key points of the Parents' Bill of Rights so that we will make sure that everyone on our team it's in legal compliance with what the bill states?
Yeah, absolutely. It's quite comprehensive. I know that you have a memo that you were provided by an association and a webinar, and sounds like your folks are definitely up on the latest. But that being said, we can absolutely have meetings and provide information to ensure compliance.
If you will, just so that we can have a form, a lot of the other school districts are operating based on a summary from their legal support. So if you will, I would just want for us to have that same so that we are in compliance and not having to do hearsay from other school districts.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So you're talking about like maybe like a checklist?
Well, a summary. They're doing summaries for their teams.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. I've been wanting to do that. Absolutely. I want to note, Madam Chair, that toward the end of this policy, Section G, there's a section called Community Services Available, and there's a placeholder there to provide links to parents for community services, but we don't seem to have links there yet.
Thank you for pointing that out. That was something that I had on my notes to bring out, and then I forgot to do that. So I had gotten with Ms. Barnum to be able to insert the links, and she's working on compiling that along with our communications team. But it's not fully compiled, so at this time, I mean, Ms. Barnum, if you want to jump in with anything else, but.
Yeah, that's underway. We've had a lot of that information in the counselor and social worker hands, but we want to make sure that we pull together an exhaustive list.
And Madam Chair, I would just like to ask you to consider moving this forward, and then, we've still got 2 more weeks before the board meeting. If at that time we see that we need to put the brakes on things, we could just pull it back at the board meeting itself, rather than go another 6 weeks before we come back here, or even longer, we come back here, and go back to the next board meeting. So move it forward with the understanding that if the staff tell us, or something changes at the legislature, rather than hold it in policy for another month, which means it's another 6 weeks out from board adoption. I just don't want to be out of compliance with a law that long. Makes me nervous.
I mean, I understand the concern. Whether or not this policy is enacted, we don't have all the mechanisms in place. So we would be out of compliance with our policy, but we're working towards the mechanisms in place is what I've gathered from the conversation now. I would like to see a few more things as far as district-wide, because hearing and reading this, and Ms. May, I mean, if you're saying you have 7 days of written notification, and now I have a parent who's like, this is what it is, which is law. Ms. Bradford's not incorrect. Mr. Vogel's not incorrect. It's law right now. And you're working at part of a district, and it's our expectation to do it, but I feel like we don't have the support in place for you guys to make it happen, or we're just hoping for the best. And I don't know if you've read through this lengthy document yet, but.
I haven't read the document, but I watched the webinar that the Superintendent's Association put out or whatever. I think that there is a lot that we as principals need time to digest and figure out what is this going to look like and how are we going to make sure that we're in compliance with all of the things. A checklist would be super helpful, or a summary, a synopsis, just so that we know all of the expectations.
And do you feel right now that the district is able to support you in that? I mean, I'm just being blunt, because if it's on the hands of you to fix it, to follow through with this, I don't feel, as a board member listening and hearing feedback, I don't feel that we're in a place as a district to support you guys to enact this. I understand this is law. I understand that we're not in compliance of it, but we do not have the things put together to make it in compliance yet.
I think with time, yeah.
Do you think in 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks? Or are you talking?
Well, I operate on my own schedule, so I'm not sure about their schedule. So I wouldn't want to say 2 weeks. I feel like that's a very quick turnaround.
Dr. Faust, if you'd like to jump in.
So yes, I think what the misconception is that we would not enact. We're enacting. It's a policy. It's a bill. It's a right. So that's enacted. What we don't have are the tools yet. So if a parent comes and makes a complaint, we know what to do. We will follow through with the process. What we're saying is that no, there's not a form online. There's not a website that has been built for this particular. Right now, it's part 2. But most of those items that are in part 2, we're already doing. So if a parent we do give report cards. We do make sure that we've never taken blood samples, we've never taken fingerprints, we've never held any type of DNA for students. So those things, if someone is saying that, then we would definitely have to research and say, well, who took DNA samples of a kid? Like, that's not what we're here for. So there are certain things in there that we honestly don't understand why it's in the bill, and what we would be responsible for in that if someone says that someone took DNA samples of my child. So we would have to research. And so then there's language in the bill that says, they have 7 days. So then they submit it to the principal 7 days. And so we've got to be able to create a timeline. So if they're not satisfied with the decision, so the principal may say that I have fixed this. We've done with this, but the parent says, well, no, it's not. So then it comes to the superintendent. So then there are 10 days. And so then it's like, okay, well, we think we've got it ironed out. And the parent says, well, no, it's not. Then it goes to the state board. So our questions are, and when we've gone to the law conferences, is who determines when it's settled? And no one can answer that, because what we determine may think that we've answered and we've provided, the parent may still say no, and it goes to the state board. So there's no language in the bill that states when it is settled. It's just there that says, and I don't have the language right in front of me, but that's the ongoing question that superintendents are saying, how do we know when the complaint is settled? So we would not know. We don't know where that fits in. So maybe, taking a hard look at the bill, rereading the bill, but the rights that are given, we do give parent conferences. We actually value parent conferences. The other question that we have, and we do have schools that do this, is like if your child's name is William, and he wants to be called Will or he wants to be called Bill, then we've got to get parent permission for that. That is an ask in some schools. We don't know. So we've got to go back and make sure that all schools, or Elizabeth is called Liz, we can't, if the parent says we're going to call her Elizabeth, it's got to be in writing. And so those are things that we have to go back and check and make sure. So yes, the bill is enacted. If the parent says, well, I didn't give you permission to call William Will, he needs to be called William. So then we're like, okay, we've got to call him William. So there are things that we just have to make sure that parents understand and school understands. But it's not that we would not, we're not asking for a scapegoat on the bill. The bill is enacted right now. It's enforced right now. If there are questions about it, then of course, please provide it to us. But it's going to take us a minute. And as I've shared with the team, we're going to have to hire someone to actually oversee all of these things that are in here, to actually meet with principals, to actually coach with principals, to go to do presentations for principals, to keep up with the timelines, to make sure that they're able to walk them step by step, because there's a lot in here, and we want to make sure that, one, that we're by, and two, that if we aren't, we've got to have the training that needs it, that's needed.
So what I hear you saying, Dr. Faust, is we are doing the mechanisms to be in compliance with the law, but on a district scope, we don't have all of the organizational pieces to make it uniform across our district. And so that's where my hesitation with this. I mean, I'll be very direct here. The rest of the policies that are on this, I'll make a motion to go ahead and move those all forward before the board. The one that I have concern about is I would like for there to be maybe even supported documentation in our policy of the forms and those things. Those are the kind of things when we're talking about streamlining the process and equipping our staff. That's the kind of stuff that I want to see in place, because I don't want it to get loopholed and then on the shoulders of our administrators of saying, good luck, figure it out. I want it to be clear of this is the expectation. Here's the form. It's going to be the same for every single one in the district. This is going to be the response. And I mean, those trainings are happening, but we don't have the tools to say, here's the link that you click on to see all these things. Here's the form that you fill to do this. It's, if you get a complaint, you have to do it. You're going to have to abide by it, and you're just going to have to talk with the central office staff to make it happen, right? So, with that.
May I ask the attorney another question? If we hold this in policy, what is the legal exposure for us by not having it in policy to match the law? Or is there any legal exposure?
Well, I know that there are some provisions of the law that require board policies regarding parental involvement, and that's what this particular policy would do. But there are other parts of the law that are simply requirements, and they're requirements whether there's a board policy touching on it or not.
All right, with that said, I'm okay holding it in policy for another month.
See, and I'll second that.
I move that we hold it in policy, yes.
So then 1310/4002 will be held in policy, or all in favor of holding that in policy?
Aye.
Any opposed? And now, because we're past our time, I'm going to make a motion to move forward 3210, 3540, 4335, 4720, 6120, and we already have 7300, so, and 6120 before the board.
What about 7,300?
We did that earlier, and both of those changes were on. So I make a motion to move those before the board.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor to move 3210, oh, they're not written out here, 3210, 3540, 4335, 4720, excuse me, and 6120. Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Those are all going to be moved past before the board. So just to recap, the existing policies with no changes that'll be going before the board meeting is 2120, 3460, 7240, 7300, 7500, 3210, 3540, 4335, 4720, and 6120. The ones that will be moving forward with changes from the attorney are 2310, 2330, 4040/7310, and 6510. The policies held in committee are going to be 2300, 2335, and 1310/4002. And policies for first reading, 6081, 7205, and policies for second reading is 2315. And now I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.